Well, first off, I just want to say thank you for doing this. I've been a
Yeah.
fan of yours for as long as I can remember. Going back, probably to when I was in middle school, I think is when I first started reading your stuff. So,
Oh, good Lord.
well, I'm not super old, but I didn't mean to age you that like that. But
No,
uh,
I've been feeling it a lot anyway, so it's not on you.
yeah. So, anyways, the first question I wanted to ask as a writer, your job already requires you for the most part to work from home.
Yeah.
Uh, but how has the quarantine affected your daily schedule, if at all?
Well, I mean, yeah, you know, I've had it so much easier than so many people because the disruption to my routine has been far more subtle and honestly easier to manage on a physical level. I think psychologically it's been a pain, but the normal days, before the dark times, before the empire, I would I'd get up between 6 and 6:30. I'd either go for a run or just go straight to the coffee. I would make sure my daughter got out okay, off to school. And then I would go down to the office and I would work, and I would work until, you know, early mid afternoon, take a break for about an hour, maybe two, to go for a long walk, come back, probably do correspondence, dinner, and then whatever work needs to be done, and there are phone calls, there are business calls throughout the day, etc. Right? What's happened now is that, well, my office is exactly as it was. Everything around me has changed, so that there are a whole lot of different stressors. It's funny because when we define our days, or at least I have come to realize that at least I did, in terms of, so in this window of time you are guaranteed to be able to do this thing, right? And in this window of time you're guaranteed to be able to do that thing, and like that. And what's happened now is that all of those, so something comes down that is requiring attention, be it something in the family, be it needing to take care of something, just whatever it may be, that sort of invades what previously had been the quote unquote work time. And then the other thing that has made it, and again, I say this being painfully aware how easy I've had it the last couple months, because I really have. I mean, I'm remarkably fortunate. I have found it emotionally, especially for the first couple of weeks, very difficult to concentrate. I had a really hard time the first couple of weeks getting my ass in the chair and doing the work. I would sit down and I just couldn't concentrate. And when I managed to write something, I would be like, "Oh, this is trash. This is this is horrible. I can't keep this. I better start again." So it is it's weird, man. It's been very weird, and you can't really isolate yourself from the rest of the world. What we've done is yeah, I mean, they call it's social distancing. We are distanced socially. So I am not seeing people outside of my family, really. And then it comes down to who I'm connecting with via, whatever online video, you name it, is available at the moment. And that actually, I think, has had a far more subtle, but genuinely, yeah, I don't want to say damaging, I don't want to overstate it, but it has definitely had an impact. And I've got friends in town, I've got colleagues in town that I haven't seen now for, in some cases, I hadn't seen them for a couple weeks before this came down. And in the case of somebody like Matt Fraction or Kelly Sue DeConnick, God, I haven't seen them in 4 months now.
This is like probably the craziest thing I've experienced. I lived through the earthquake when I was a kid, but I don't really remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a 5-year-old daughter, and she's driving me insane. You know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love her. I love her, but like, and I can only imagine what she's feeling. Like she lost her school year, and
Yeah.
it's very unusual times, very unusual.
Well, and that's the other thing, right? Especially as a parent, you're trying to figure out how do you negotiate this for your kids. My son, was in New York for college, had to come back, and is still finishing up his year, and is dealing with some very, shall we say, unhelpful professors. And then my daughter's a junior in high school, and she's well, she would point out she's not now. Technically, she's a senior, and
Yeah.
her summer plans. She had some really cool things that were on tap for this summer. This program she'd been accepted to, and things like that. All of that's gone, and then yeah, I mean, and I can't, it's just, there's nothing easy about this. I understand undue haste to quote unquote open up the country. That is a staggeringly ignorant haste because it does not understand what it is that we are dealing with in this moment.
Right.
But I understand how people get there in the same way that I understand how the miscommunication has continued to perpetuate, because we've got an executive that is not passing information appropriately. I mean, it sounds to me like you're in California. So
Yes, I'm in LA, so
yeah, so I mean, Newsom, and is it Villaraigosa?
yeah, I think so.
Have,
No,
have
Garcetti.
Garcetti been doing it? I mean, my understanding of just everything I'm reading and seeing, the communication's been really good.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
At least there's clear delineation, or at least an attempt to pursue it. And
Hmm.
I mean, we got a White House today saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna stand down this task force, right? Because it's gonna be over by June." It's like, really? You're high.
Yeah, that
Sec,
that dude's
sec,
an idiot. So
yeah, the second wave's gonna crest in June.
yeah,
We're looking at a body count. They're gonna be over 1 million dead. There's no
yeah,
question. And that's not being pessimistic. That's being realistic.
yeah, I
This
agree.
this is a sea change. There is not going to be a return to normal, even if you get a vaccine in the next 18 months.
Yeah,
This is an important change in the civilization and the society. And you ignore that to your peril, quite literally to your peril.
right.
It may well be your life, which is one thing if it's just your life, but you don't have the right to endanger mine.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, it is an interesting moment to be alive, sir.
Yeah, yeah, that's putting it mildly, but yes, I
I,
agree.
and you actually did remind me of something, by the by. You were talking about having lived through the earthquake, but not really remembering it. And, for both of my kids, one of them's 20 and one of them's about to turn 17, they've never experienced a moment like this. There's no cultural moment for them akin to this. They know of 9/11, right? But we haven't, there's really no compass point for them on this. And thus there is no compass point for a lot of Americans.
So has this have these unusual circumstances? Have you come up with any ideas for new books? Have you been inspired to write anything new?
Well, it's funny. I had a thing I was planning on doing prior to this, and I got to it, which is good. I am not set yet to. I tend to need moments to process. This is one of the reasons why I don't tend to do benefit books that are like this tragic event has happened and we're putting out a fundraiser, and I'm happy to donate, but I tend to be fairly reticent to offer content because I kind of want to, at least for my own purposes, if not in a broader sense, I kind of want the dust to settle and for me to be able to process what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling.
Right.
I will say I've been thinking a lot about how this is going to change story and art. I did a Hero Initiative fundraiser that was a class this past Friday. You know, there were like 4 people, and we all got on Zoom, and then I basically yammered at them for about 2 hours about character and how one constructs character and how character drives the story. And one of the things I was saying is, coming out of this, you know, a first kiss is going to be a very different thing.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about something like that.
You know, a love scene is a very, very different thing post COVID-19. We are saying something very, very different about somebody's intimacy and willingness to be intimate. And you're gonna start seeing that is going to manifest, you know, in art from here forward. And you know, look, Hollywood is already up to its ears in COVID-19 rom-coms and so on. I'm sure every screenwriter, you know, batted out their take already. But yeah, I mean, look, I don't know if you've had this experience. My wife and I, at night, when we are desperately trying to wind down, we don't want to watch anything that's going to work us up. So we basically watch comfort food. And for us, comfort food is old Columbos, right? We watch Peter Falk, you know, catch the bad guy. And there have been a couple times when she and I have been, you know, propped up in bed watching, and we'll each be like, yeesh, during these crowd scenes, or, you know, stuff in hospitals, and we're like, oh my God, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something that's going to have to be addressed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's one thing for us to go, well, it was 75. But it's another thing if you're going to make something in 2021, you know, that doesn't acknowledge the state of the world, this new world. If you're going to try to pretend that it's the same old, you're going to kick your audience out. And the worst thing you can do is eject them from the story, right? The worst thing you can do is write something or have a character do something or say something that pushes your audience, be it a reader, be it a viewer, out of the story. It gives them a moment where they go, wait a minute, right? I got no idea how this is going to get negotiated. Fist fights are going to be a very different thing. You know?
Yeah. I mean, these are things I haven't even thought about. I mean, really, you know, I'm just kind of in my own little bubble. Pretty much my routine is I've been reading a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really watch a lot of television, so I'm kind of working on my website. I had stopped reaching out to creators, but with no new books coming out, I was like, well, maybe I'll get back to doing that. And you know, I worked part-time at a comic book store also, so like just watching how that's been going on. I still keep in touch with my manager. One of my good friends, Mario, who I met through the store too, is we actually I guested on their podcast a couple weeks ago. We did book 1 of Gotham Central.
Oh yeah?
Which is one of our favorite series. Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, it's, and I'm not just saying this, I think it's in the top 5 things from DC that I recommend people. It's always been one of my favorite series. I'm still sad that it didn't go on longer, but I'm grateful for the 4 books that I got.
That is very kind of you. That is an Ed Brubaker, Michael Art tour de force. I think I mostly just got to be there for it. So I'm very proud of that book. That is one of those books that when and I know it, and I got no problem with it. You know, this is going to be this will be the title that's listed in my comics career obituary. You know,
Yeah.
Wrote Gotham Central with Ed Brubaker. You know, and Michael Lark. There are worse things to be known for. I got no complaints there.
You're known for a lot more than that. So, what books are you currently working on right now?
Well, I'm still trying to get the script of Lazarus Risen #5 done. Michael, those scripts are now, you know, because we're doing it quarterly, they're 44 pages of story minimum, and then like another 22 pages of other content. So the short story that I commissioned for it came in. Today's Tuesday, yeah. So it came in yesterday. I get to read that this week and do my pass on it, and then send it back to the writer for revision. And Michael's about halfway through the actual issue right now, and I need to finish up that script because it's so big. I find that I have to write it in chunks,
Mm-hmm.
and then I feed it to him, and then the nice thing about working with Michael is, I mean, he's my collaborator. He is not quote unquote my artist. He's the guy I'm collaborating on this book with. So he and I tend to have a lot of conversations about not so much where it's going, because I actually kind of like keeping him in the dark, believe it or
Yeah.
not. Well, it's because he's my first reader,
Yeah.
So if I get a good reaction out of him on the script, that's always a good sign for me. And then part of it is also that Michael doesn't want to know too much. He doesn't want to know where the story is going overall. So we have these very weird conversations where I have to be like, how much do you want to, what do you want me to tell you? And then we tend to go back and forth about how to do things. Like I had written a sequence for this issue and sent it to him, and he emailed me and he was like, are you sure you want to do this? Because I don't think this is the right choice. And I ended up looking it over, and I was like, and I had, while I was writing it, been debating with myself as to how I was going to execute what I wanted to execute, and had convinced myself that my first instinct was not the right one. And Michael basically called me on it. So I was like, okay, well, all right, I'll rewrite that. So it's an interesting give and take process. So we're doing that. We have just about put to bed the last issue of the second Old Guard. Leo actually sent some stuff today that'll be included in the trade. And that's looking pretty good. And we had hoped to have it out well before the movie comes out, but that seems unlikely at this point. It seems more, well, it's not unlikely at this point. I know for a fact the movie will be out before the last issue of the second Old Guard series comes out, and then the trade will be at least a month after that. So, Leo is ready to start the third story.
Awesome.
I'm not ready to write it yet. Like I know where it ends. I know where I'm going, but I'm not sure how I'm going to get there. So I effectively had to tell him, dude, cool your jets. I want to get this right. Nicola is wrapping up Black Magic 16. There's another book that I actually have two other things that I'm developing. Ideally, both of them will be through Image.
Nice.
But they're both sort of in this weird slow space. One of them Image knows about, and the other one Image doesn't. And I suspect they're going to get inundated in the same way that all the studios are getting, here's 1 million COVID scripts. There are going to be a lot of comics creators going to be going to Image and Oni and so on, saying, I have an idea. So we'll see. So there's that. And then, I've been sort of in this weird dance with Hollywood the last year and a half. So there's been a lot of stuff with that. Most of that is on the phone. It sort of generates a momentum in telephone call, and then you hit a certain point and get to start typing.
Okay.
So there have been a lot of I've been spending about 5 to 6 hours a week just talking to one guy in particular right now about a movie, and unfortunately I can't say anything about it. So it's not like I'm not keeping busy. It just feels like I'm not getting a lot accomplished.
I sometimes I feel the same way right now, especially.
Yeah, that's very much the feeling. So
Of all your recent projects of the past few years, Lazarus has been my favorite by far.
well, thank you.
Yeah. I've always wanted to ask you, if given the chance, where the idea for the book came from.
Oh, it came from a bunch of different places, and they all sort of gummed up at once. I was in New York. So in 2009, right, I'd stopped working for DC, and I was really not in a good place with regards to my mental and emotional health. And and I went into a pretty deep depression, and I didn't do a lot of work for the next couple of years. It was just very hard to get anything done. And towards the end of that, I think 2012, I don't know if it was 2012 or not. I had gone to Manhattan. I'd taken my son out there, I think around New York Comic Con, and he had a friend here in Portland who had moved to New York, so I took him out so they could see each other. And I saw a college buddy of mine when I was in town, and my memory is, and I might be conflating things, but my memory was I had this conversation with this friend of mine, and he said he wasn't in finance, but he was working finance adjacent to Wall Street, right?
Okay.
And he was talking about how in 2008, 2009, he had known all these guys who, he was talking about the economy, and he was talking about absolutely how bad it had been in 2008, like what the situation really was, and how people did not seem to understand it, and that he had known guys in finance who were literally going out and buying shotguns and cases of baked beans and getting a cabin up in the woods because they thought this was going to be the end of the world. He's not exaggerating. He was like, it was really bad. It was that close to the end of it, and people don't realize it. And I was like, huh. And at the same time, right, I was looking at the 99% movement, and those protests, and I, for whatever reason, had come to the conclusion, well, that the end of the world wasn't going to be in nuclear fire, and it wasn't going to be, in COVID, and it wasn't even going to be climate change. That what was going to end the world was going to be, the apocalypse was going to be economic. And I was sort of messing around with that in my head, and I don't even remember when it was. I was out in my backyard, and it had to be the fall because I was raking leaves, just sort of talking to myself. And I had what ultimately became the first 3 lines of the first issue of Lazarus, though they were written in my head, they were first person. So it wasn't this description of the trauma of these bullet wounds from a third person point of view. It was a first person, but it was really objective. It was really unemotional. It was like, bullet 1 entered here, does this, does this, does this. Bullet 2 enters here, does this, does this, does this. Bullet 3 enters here, does this, does this, does this. And then I got up, and I didn't know who was saying this, right? Like, I had the line, but I didn't know who the character was.
Okay.
And in pretty short order, just me being me, I figured out that, well, it had to be a woman. And I thought I was doing sort of a zombie thing because zombies were really big at that time. And I think that had been in my head. But the more I looked at it, the more it sort of married to this idea of the financial apocalypse. I hadn't written anything, but I was toying with the idea, and I was in Dallas on a book tour. This was for my last novel, I think. And Michael Lark and I went out to dinner. And at that point, Michael and I had been trying to do black magic together, actually, because Nicola was exclusive to DC. And we had been having a really hard time getting it off the ground with the publisher. We were just having a really difficult time with the deal. And we're sitting there at dinner, and I said, so, hey, I have this idea. And I told him basically the pitch for that first issue of Lazarus. And he was like, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. So I was like, all right, well, I'll go home and I'll write it. So I went home and I wrote the script and I sent it to him. And I got a call the next day, and he was like, I hate it. He was like, this is not what you told me it was going to be. And I hate every single one of these characters. And I mean, Jesus, Greg, where's that scene you described? And I was like, well, I actually was thinking this and that. I did the thing where I talked myself out of it. And he basically he likes pulling this one out on me. He said, Look, even Hitler loved his dog. Okay, I mean, as vile as the guy was. So I was like, all right, I'll give it a pass. So I rewrote it and I sent it back. And that was when he was like, yes, this is the thing. This is what I want to do. And I went to Image and I said, so Michael Larkin, I want to do this book. And they were like, absolutely, go ahead. So I was like, okay, well, that's how we get there. But, chasing down that idea of the economic apocalypse, and I'd been looking at these studies, Oxfam published, I believe they still do, an annual report on the distribution of wealth, around the world. And at the time I started Lazarus, it was something like 84 people control something like 90% of the world's wealth.
Holy shit.
Oh, well, hang on, it gets better. Every year since then, that number has declined. So when I had, thought of, well, there are 16 families and they own everything, because that's where the idea comes from, right? They own it all. I was like, well, 16, that seems far enough off. I mean, I think the number is now around there. For real.
That's fucking crazy.
Oh, yeah, no, it's sick. It's broken. This is absolutely broken. But this is how you get a world where Jeff Bezos can donate $100 million to a food bank, and that is the same amount of money he makes in 11 hours. But that's not the crime. The crime is that none of his employees at Whole Foods or Amazon are getting paid sick leave, and they're not being supplied with PPE. So there's no justification for that, right? I mean, the only possible way you can stand on that is, well, it's my money and I get to do with it as I want. And it's like, yeah, you're absolutely right. However, it's morally and ethically bankrupt, and somebody needs to force your feet to the fire. Zuckerberg knows precisely how Facebook has been weaponized and the evil it does. He doesn't care. They could stop it. Jack over at Twitter could do the exact same thing. It's real easy. Google could stop it. They're not. They don't. And the reason they don't is because it makes them money. It is not an issue of freedom of speech. There is no guarantee of freedom of speech in private forums. And that's what those are. They could do something about it, but it's not in their financial interest to do so. And when you've got that as the driving motive behind almost every business, behind every business and every political decision now, then you're driving the capitalist car right off of the proverbial cliff. Because even if everything holds together, and this is where you get Lazarus, right? Even if everything holds together, at the end of the day, you end up with a very, 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 very small group of people who are so obscenely wealthy that they now own everything.
That's nuts, man.
Right. And when they own everything, then where do we fit into that? We're either of use to that or we're not. We're going to be surplus to requirement. Yeah, I mean that's how you get the form of Lazarus, and then you start to break it down, right? You start to think about it. What does that world look like? Well, that world looks an awful lot like a feudal world. It looks like a world where there are kings and royal families, and then there are effectively nobles and knights, and then beneath them, peasants. Lots and lots of peasants. Ta-da, Lazarus. And then, you do the rest of it. I refer to it as the logical extrapolation, right? For instance, we know that the genome has been mapped. We know that CRISPR exists as a gene splicing technology. We know that there are advances being made every day. We know that you can grow new teeth from stem cells. We know that you can grow an ear from stem cells. Well, that becomes proprietary knowledge. And then if you go, okay, well, so what happens if you chase that down further? It's not that far off. When you talk about longevity treatments and so on, there are, these same aforementioned multi billionaires slash, almost trillionaires now. These are the people who are investing a lot of money and never having to die. Yeah.
I want to go reread Lazarus now with all this information in my head. That's such a trip.
Yeah, long answer. Sorry.
No, it was a great answer. Two of your greatest strengths, in my opinion, are your world building skills and your strong characterization. So I was wondering, when building a new world of characters, Lazarus or Old Guard, even Gotham Central, do you have it all in your head, or do you write out almost like a Bible or brief history of each character, main characters, or what have you?
It's project to project, honestly, Ryan. I mean, I for Lazarus, I write Lazarus in a program called Scrivener. And the great thing about using Scrivener is that it is effectively like a virtual binder. Okay. It's like having this great big virtual three ring binder that you can just shove more pages in over and over. So I've got sections in the Lazarus binder that are on all of the families, on technology, on the different Lazari, on, for instance, the way the Carlisle military is structured, on the daggers specifically. Like each member of Dagger Team Alpha has an entry. I know them by name, right? Other characters get filled in as I go, and sometimes there are things that I know I'll need, so I'll write it out and then build from there. So it is for that world, because it is different enough, I guess. I kind of needed to take really good notes.
Mm-hmm.
For the Old Guard, it just kind of came out of my head, and I can sit there and I can just, at least for the first one, was able to sit down and just write it. And Old Guard started with, really with me just going, I had this idea for this character who was Andy, ultimately, for a really long time, and I had been toying with this story, and I was like, I just want to write something fun. And I think I sat down and I wrote that script in like a night. It was just the first issue script. I was just like, wee, it's a Looney Tunes cartoon, because it kind of is. I've said in other interviews, Andy is Slappy Squirrel from the Animaniacs. She's
hilarious.
But she is. She's buttermilk. It makes a body bitter, right? I mean, she is the world's crankiest grandma. She wants the whole world to get off her goddamn lawn. So I knew her, and I was going to have fun with it. It wasn't till I was like at the end of the fourth issue that I realized what I was actually writing about, like what the story was actually about, which is not the same as the plot, right? I knew what the plot was. But it wasn't until I was at the end of like issue 4, I was like, oh, right, I'm trying to work out how I feel about my dad dying. It's like, I'm writing about death. Oh, right. But the research for that book was such that I was researching very much on the fly. So I knew, for instance, that I wanted Booker to be the youngest until we meet Niall. And I knew he was French because I knew that he was called Booker because his nickname was Le Livre, right? French for the book. And I had this idea that the whole reason he was called that is because he was the only one of them who wasn't a soldier. He was a criminal. He had been a forger. And then he got arrested and was either going to go, get thrown into the Bastille, or was told, or you can march for the Emperor's glory into Russia. And like, I'll take option B, please. And, I know enough to know that the French invasion of Russia was an ill-fated venture. And so when I was writing, for instance, his flashback, it was very quickly opening, Firefox and doing searches and filling in dates. But it wasn't until I was writing the movie and really working on the second one where I was like, okay, I better mind my P's and Q's now. There are rules here and I have to know what they are. So it was, in that sense, the research sort of followed after it. The world building sort of came after the idea rather than hand in hand with it like it did in Lazarus. Black Magic has a Scrivener file similar to the one that I have for Lazarus as well. I mean, there's just all this information because I know there's a mythology at work in the world that may never become apparent, but I need to know it for my purposes.
Another good example of your character work, I would say, would have to be Gotham Central. I think, like, personally, I think that book would do extremely well in today's market with how much things have changed. And I was wondering if you've ever thought of doing another police procedural title in that vein or anything along those lines.
It's been mentioned to me on more than one occasion, the idea of trying to do Central again, or a new Gotham Central. And in point of fact, I should say, the book that ultimately became the Lois Lane sort of maxi series that Mike Perkins and I have just wrapped up, meaning that our production on it is done. That book came out of sort of the idea of, well, let's do a Gotham Central-y idea, but not the cops. It was going to be journalism. The book was going to be called The Planet, and it was going to be about the reporters, you know, in and around the Daily Planet who aren't named Lois Lane or Clark Kent, and sort of what it's like to have to try to report the news and to investigate stories in a world where, you know, alien invasions happen and Superman happens and so on. And for a variety of reasons, that didn't come to pass, and we ended up, the compromise was, here, do a Lois Lane book. I'm a little leery about the idea of going back into Gotham with the cops, because we did that story, and that book was such an important collaboration between me and Ed and Michael. And when Ed and Michael left, you know, with no disparagement to, you know, Kano and Stefano and you know, everybody who came in afterwards, but it wasn't the same book. That was part of the reason why I was like, yeah, I've got to end it. Right? I had always known how I was going to end it. You know, I always knew what Renee's story would end with. And in so much as Marcus was Ed's POV character for this series, Renee always had been mine. So I knew where it was going to go. And I got to tell you, man, the idea of going back and trying to do it again, as well as I would hate to do it, because I don't want to undermine what we did. And the worst thing in the world would be to try to recapture some of that lightning, you know, and put it in a bottle and fail then to do it, right? Because it would certainly diminish what I think it would impact the previous, right? And I don't want to do that. I mean, as bittersweet as it is that Central ends, it is one of the rare occasions in mainstream comics that I ever did something that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. So there's a piece of me that's kind of like, why don't we just leave it and appreciate it for what it is, and look in other corners, because you can take the Central take, and you can do that in any superhero universe. You know, you can do that in almost any corner of the DC universe. You know, there is a really legitimate story to be told, like I said, about journalism in a superhero universe. But the core of Gotham Central was always, what is it like to be normal and try to be good in this world?
That was the best part of it, in my opinion. That's what I loved so much. Speaking about Lois Lane, I'm really sad that that's ending. And I was wondering, well, I mean, it's one of my favorite DC books being published. Once it was announced, I knew I had to have it. Is there a chance, I know you said you're done, is there a chance that you could possibly come back to do more in the future, or is this just a 12-issue maxi and that's it?
More with Lois specifically?
There's always
a chance. Yeah, I mean, there's always a chance. You know, DC I've been talking with a couple editors there. They have tossed me various ideas. I am not opposed to these ideas. It's a question of a couple of things. It's a question of my time. It's a question of, making sure that we're able to negotiate a deal that gives them what they want, but also gives me at least some of what I want. It's odd, like I said earlier, the last 18 months, I've been sort of oddly diversifying my portfolio. And, I've got a feature film that, I wrote coming out in July. I've got, Some Towns on TV. We're still working on Lazarus. There is at a certain point, a question of, do I, where do I want to put my time and my energy? And I'm 50 now, and I am nowhere near as quick as I used to be. I actually, as much as, and don't ever get me wrong on this, as much as I love the DC universe, there is a piece of me that goes, I've been there for 20 years. It's a long time. I mean, maybe it's time I got out of the way and let some other people come in and play with the toys, So I actually sort of go back and forth about it a lot. Is this a place where, I don't ever want to overstay my welcome.
I think you are.
Well, you are kind to say so, and I hope you are true. But it is always better to leave when nobody wants to see you go, rather than to leave when they're all like, "Oh, thank God he's gone." So that's sort of where I am. But yeah, DC is always going to have an in with me, and they know it, unfortunately. All they have to do is, walk by and whisper certain names in my ear, and I'll be like, you've got my attention. And it's unfortunately a fairly long list of names at this point, versus say at Marvel, where 99% of the names they could throw my way, I'd be like, not really interested. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's just, I've always been a DC guy.
Same here. Same here. So that's why I just don't want you. I don't want you to go. I want you to continue to write DC books. I mean, I can't even tell you how many people in the shop I work at, they love Lois Lane.
That's great to hear.
It's one of the best. It really is one of the best DC books out right now. And this is no slight on Bendis, but it's my favorite Superman related book. That, and then Jimmy Olsen by Fraction.
Oh my God.
Books are brilliant.
Yeah. What Lieber and Matt are doing on Jimmy, I think it is so good, and it's real easy to be distracted by the goofy, because it's funny, but there's some serious stuff at work there that I kind of dig, and I'm lucky I get to call Matt a friend. I get to call Brian a friend. So, I know sort of what's cooking in the background, and it's like, oh, this is gonna, like, where Jimmy is going, I think is gonna really blow people away.
Oh,
like what he is doing with that series, I think. I look at Brian's stuff. I've said this elsewhere before, but it's true. I look at Brian's work, and I can't do what he does, but I understand how he does it. I look at Kelly Sue's work, for instance, and I understand how she does it, even though she does it in a very different way than I do. I look at my wife's work, I look at Matt's work, and I cannot tell you how they did it. I just don't know. I look at it and I'm like, Jesus, I have no idea how your head works that you came up with that and executed it.
Yeah, I'm gonna be sad to see those two books, and they like, I know they're in the DC universe, but they just feel so different from everything else that's coming out from DC, while still playing in that with those toys, Yeah. So I just want to ask a couple questions about your writing. I was wondering if you have any other influences besides comic book writers, that you've drawn influence from in your writing.
Well, I mean, I started as a novelist, right? I started in prose. So, I can go back, sadly, with the realization now that I'm pointing pretty strongly to the Western male canon. But, there are a number of novelists, for instance, that I draw that I know influenced me. I'm huge, I love Hemingway. I know there are people who hate him, but I love Hemingway's work. I love his prose. I love Chandler. I love Hammett. I love Donald Westlake, both writing as Donald Westlake and writing as Richard Stark. There's a writer named Cynthia Ozick who I adore. There is a writer by the name of Tim O'Brien who is another one of these writers that I look at what he does and I'm like, I don't know how he did it. This is fantastic. He's got a collection of short stories called The Things They Carried that I think is one of those books that had a profound effect on me in a way that 30 years later, I'm still unpacking it. So, I can give you a long, long list of writers, but I think, honestly, if you were to stylistically, my biggest influences are probably Douglas Adams and Ernest Hemingway, which is a weird combination. I tend to think, and it comes out more in my novels, that a lot of people read my stuff really straight, and they read it as this really hard-boiled tough guy, and it's like, it's not. It is, I wouldn't say tongue-in-cheek, but it is, it is meant to be a lot more wry than I think people expect from the genre. And it's funny because I'm talking to you right now, I'm looking at like all these shelves in my office and I'm being like, oh yeah, them, there you go, there's another one. So, I'll say that I have had the blessing to have come to Terry Pratchett's work late. And so I have been exploring it and falling ever more in love with it over the last several years. It is going to never not be a source of sorrow to me. I did not know who he was when I am sure he and I were in the same places, because I would have loved to have had the opportunity to shake his hand. I think he is a phenomenal writer. He did the unthinkable. He unseated Adams in my pantheon. I love his stuff even more than I love Douglas Adams, and I love Douglas Adams. So,
do you ever, when you're writing, do you ever listen to music? Is there any type of music that you?
Oh man, all the time. Yeah, I used to, when I was in college, when I was young, I should say, way back in, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, ha ha ha. I used to be able to write to anything, and I would put on, loud music, and I could work to that. The older I've gotten, the more I find that I can't actually. If I'm listening to lyrics or whatnot, it'll pull my concentration. So I tend to listen to instrumental primarily. And depending on what I'm working on, it'll be soundtracks or it'll be jazz. Okay. And I'm an old school jazz guy. I like Coltrane, I like Monk, I like Dexter Gordon, I like Miles Davis, I like Charlie Parker. You can hit all the regulars. I love Kamasi Washington. I find him hard to work to a lot of the time. Sun Ra the same way. I want music that when I'm working will sort of create the buffer between me and the rest of the world, sort of insulate me to the story. And also that it'll, if it's the right music at the right time, it'll actually influence it. Like writing the old guard while listening to, any action movie soundtrack always works. Be it John Wick or Mission Impossible, it seems to have done me well. Lazarus, mostly tends to be quieter jazz or, oddly, the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. I love Howard Shore soundtracks.
Oh my God, those soundtracks are amazing.
Yeah,
I have all three of them.
Yeah, I love them. So yeah, and piano. I like a lot of piano actually.
Have you ever listened to Ramin Djawadi, the Game of Thrones soundtracks?
No, but I've listened to. He did the soundtrack, or he did, I think, the first Pacific Rim movie.
Okay. I know I think he did Westworld also, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, his music is amazing too. Highly recommend that.
I actually have never seen Game of Thrones. When Lazarus first came out, Game of Thrones was starting up, and I saw an early review that likened it to Game of Thrones, and at that point, I was like, well, then I guess I can't watch it ever. I have,
I have seen people do that.
I have to finish Lazarus before I see Game of Thrones or read Game of Thrones now. So yeah.
And then I had two more questions. First one, I was wondering, what books are you currently reading?
What books am I currently reading right now? Kind of have to run upstairs and check. Actually, you know what? No, I don't. Hold on. You catching me in an in between. I'm reading right now. I'm reading Jack Vance's The Dying Earth books because I've been told by people that I respect that I need to read Jack Vance. So I am sort of struggling my way through that. I am. So that's the current one, and I have Matt Taibbi's. I never know how to pronounce it. I believe it's Taibbi. Taibbi. Hate Inc. Right,
Okay.
which is a nonfiction. It's why today's media makes us despise one another, and that was recommended to me. So I'm going to be reading that. Yeah, I just saw again an ad, slide across my web browser there. Technology not always so good. Social media bad. Yeah, those are the two big ones.
And then the last question I had was, what's the best piece of advice you ever got?
For writing?
Yes.
The best piece of writing advice I ever got was from a man named Frank Burgone, Dr. Frank Burgone. He's a professor at Vassar College, where I went undergrad. And he was the teacher of my senior seminar, which is the class I credit with teaching me really how to write. And we had conferencing before the class really started in earnest my senior year, and it was going to run year long. And he asked at the first class, for us to send him whatever we might have been working on over the summer so he could read it and comment about it. And so I sent him a story I had written that I was reasonably pleased with. It was a little sci-fi fantasy thing. And I went into his office, and he just kicked me up and down for about 15 minutes. Handed me the story, and it wasn't like he was yelling at me, but he just tore it to pieces. And he gave me all of his written notes, and he had written them out. I still have them to this day. They're stapled into one of my old notebooks. At the end of the day, the notes distilled to the following, which was, if it isn't emotionally honest, I don't care. There is no reason to read it if it is not emotionally honest. You can make it about anything you want, but you have to tell the truth. And if you think about that sentence in the abstract, right, it makes no sense. It can be about whatever you want, but you have to tell the truth. But it is the best advice I ever got. You can get away with almost anything in a story if you are honest within the rules of your story as to the how and the why and the what of it, and most importantly, to the human reactions and responses to it. And that was what he hit me on, and he was right. And I think if my writing is any good today, it comes out of that moment. And it comes out of being told you have to be honest. And it is harder than you might think. There's a reason why a lot of comics are bad, because they are dishonest. They go for low-hanging fruit, or they rely on the reader providing the emotion